settlement based on one man, one vote. But, he says, there are negotiations being arrested.
Now, in the world of streaming services, you don't have to worry about someone coming in and interrupting your show, not even a commercial. But back in the day, something like this was a lot more common. Coming in at number 10, we have Max Headroom. This one is one of the most bizarre and famous TV hijackings of all time. Back in the era of basic cable, before you could steal stuff on the internet at any moment of the day, and before Netflix was funneling endless content right into your home, you had to get all your viewing pleasures from the movies and cable. And one day in 1987, there were some people in Chicago who were in for a very strange surprise. They were all just chilling, watching Doctor Who, and then out of nowhere, there was a guy who was dressed up as Max Headroom. Max Headroom was a fake character from a British TV show. He was completely digital looking, like an episode of Reboot. But this dude wasn't the official Max Headroom. No, he was wearing a mask and he just started yelling things into the camera, saying some strange things like the Coke slogan. I don't think that he worked for Coke. And he closed the whole thing out by pulling down his pants and having a woman with a French maid's outfit spank his butt with a fly swatter. The best part about this is no one had any idea who this was, and people think that he had some sort of nefarious plan, but I think he just wanted to cause chaos. Next, we have Mayday. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show Mayday, but it's one of those disaster reenactment shows where something goes terribly wrong and they interview the people that it happened to. It's the kind of stuff you see on the Discovery Channel now that they don't have any shows about science. But this was being shown in Australia on the 7 network back in 2007. That seems like a lifetime ago now. But the show was doing its regular thing, talking about planes falling out of the sky, and then out of nowhere, an audio recording just changed the entire tone. It was someone saying over and over, "Jesus Christ, help us, Lord." Now, when you're watching a show about plane crashes, you can imagine that this might be seen as something that was supposed to be there. But this was on repeat for 6 minutes. One of the weirdest parts about this was that it was all in a southern accent. And on top of that, once the story hit the news and everyone was talking about how weird this was, and the video was uploaded to the internet, the network denied that it ever happened. They said that the audio was part of the original broadcast. Like, what are you talking about? There's a 6-minute chunk of someone calling out for help from Jesus. Next on the list, we have God's opinion on Playboy. I don't think that the Lord and Savior would be very happy about people watching the Playboy channel. Well, there was a Christian man who certainly thought so, and he wanted all the people watching to know. This was back in 1987 when the Playboy channel was interrupted by a broadcast that was screaming Bible verses about how they're sinners and God is watching and blah blah blah. You guys know how it always goes. The man responsible for this was Thomas Haney, who worked for the Christian Broadcasting Network. He would be arrested for this 3 years later. Next on the list, we have The Old Couple. This one is shrouded in a field of mystery. To this day, no one knows what went down with this hijacking. For this story, we're going to have to shoot back to the year 2007. Everyone at home was watching some regular cable television, and then something insane came in and shocked all of them. It was a still image of 2 faces. Now, that doesn't seem insane, but it was the mood that the faces set. Neither one of these faces were real people. They both looked like they had been made in some sort of software. One of them had a big happy grin on its face, and the other one was a frowning creepy face, almost like they were representations of theater, comedy, and tragedy. This image stayed on the screen for a while. There was 0 sound that came along with it, and then it was gone. To this day, no one knows what the hell it meant or why they were there. Some people think that it was a dark omen, but the network says that it was just a scheduling error, and the image was actually from an ad that was supposed to play later. Next on the list, guys, we have Captain Midnight. Not everyone who is going to take over a broadcast is going to do so just for a strange spanking session or to yell out religious incantations that don't really make any sense. No, some people are going to do it for a noble cause. Well, in their mind, it's probably a noble cause. Captain Midnight, also known as John R. McDougal, that's his real name, was a man who used his understanding of satellite networks to send out a message to everyone who was watching HBO back in the 80s. This, of course, happened close to midnight. Well, it was closer to 12:30, but you get what he was going for. The broadcast interruption that he sent out was chastising HBO for their high prices. Their price scheme was affecting his satellite business, and he had to get a second job, so he wanted to protest, and it was was a pretty famous protest. He might have gotten away with it if he wasn't such a blabbermouth. The dude was eventually caught because someone heard him bragging about the whole thing at a bar, but on the bright side, he didn't have any jail time, just had to pay a fine and then was put on probation.
What you're seeing here is news coverage in Laos of a mysterious phenomenon known as the Naga fireballs. Every year in late October, crowds gather along the Mekong River in Thailand to watch red balls of light float up from the water and then vanish into the night sky. They're called Naga fireballs, and locals say they're caused by a giant serpent spirit that lives in the river. The orbs don't make any noise, they come out of nowhere and they rise fast, sometimes hundreds in one night. There's been a lot of debate about what's really going on here. A Thai documentary once claimed it was just tracer rounds being fired by soldiers across the river in Laos. Others have blamed flare guns or some kind of flammable gas bubbling up from the riverbed, like methane or phosphine, but none of those explanations totally hold up. The balls don't behave like flares, and scientists pointed out that the conditions needed for gas bubbles to ignite like that don't really line up. In 2021, during a strict curfew, officials made sure there were no people out with flares, and the fireballs still showed up. This footage was taken in downtown Milwaukee in 2018 during a live broadcast. The news anchors had no idea what they were looking at. Fireworks? Aliens? They joked. It's very strange. This doesn't even look like your typical UAP footage. These things aren't moving in any sort of recognizable pattern. They're just floating in every which direction. They almost look like ghosts zipping through the air than any artificial object. And there are so many of them. It's really cool, but if I saw this in person, I'd be pretty unsettled. What do you all think of this one? If someone can enlighten me as to what this could be, please share your thoughts down below. This next one comes from a 2017 episode of the British talk show This Morning, featuring a couple and their possessed doll. The chair it sat on started to rock on its own several times throughout the interview.
That chair's beginning to rock. Look at that.
Who's doing that? Stop it.
The owner said that she and her husband had been walking by an antique store when they spotted a few old-looking dolls. The couple decided to buy a few of them because they were cheap and figured they might be able to flip them for more. Well, as soon as the dolls came home with them, strange things started to happen. They had one doll, the one they brought to the TV studio, sitting on the dresser in their room. Well, one morning the husband got up, hopped in the shower, and then suddenly felt this burning sensation on his leg.
And I looked down and there was a lot of scratches all over my knee.
They put the doll in their shed inside a plastic bin. Well, a couple days later, the wife went in and opened the bin, only to find that somehow the doll's necklace had been removed, even though it had been wrapped up tightly on the doll initially. And that night she woke up at 2 a.m. hearing this whooshing noise moving past the bed, almost like the rustling of clothing, or more specifically, a dress. There was nothing there. They ended up selling the doll. Did Pope Francis vanish into thin air on live TV? This was filmed back in April of 2020. The Pope showed up at the window above St. Peter's Square to bless people affected by the pandemic. Then he turned around and walked back inside, only before he was out of camera range, he suddenly just vanishes. You don't see him slowly disappear into the shadows. He's just there 1 second, then he's not. It's pretty bizarre. It's hard to find the original news segment online too, because it was taken down for some reason. In 2010, a Jamaican news station covered a story about a boy who claimed that he was being haunted by a duppy, basically a ghost. And the news team captured two strange incidents on camera. First, the boy is sitting in a chair talking about the strange experiences when all of a sudden he flies backward, as if something is pulling him. Then later in the segment, the boy claims to see the spirit standing close by watching him, and then he gets pulled again. At least that's what it looks like. Now, notice how one of his legs is in the air as he continues to move backward. And then when his mom grabs him, his legs flip around like they're being grabbed at by someone, only we can't actually see anyone. It could be faked, but it is a damn good performance by this kid if it is. Alright, so at first glance, this just looks like some streaker running around a soccer field. If you're watching casually, you might even laugh it off, but the longer you watch, the weirder this footage is. This figure shows up from multiple camera angles, dashing through the crowd and along the edge of the field, and nobody reacts, at all. No one turns their head, no one flinches, it's like they don't even see it. Then you notice this thing doesn't look fully solid, it's kind of see-through. There's a moment where it looks like it passes right through a group of people. Plus, this person actually ends up on the field, and if you know anything about stadium security, you know the second someone who's not meant to be there steps foot on the grass, they're getting tackled and dragged off. But here, nothing happens. Well, with all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.
Next on the list, we have the zombies are here. I don't know if you guys are into zombies taking over the earth, but when I think about it, I kind of get excited. Like, if the zombies come and we all have to go into full apocalypse mode, then it resets a lot of stuff back at zero. Who cares how much money you have? The new currency is food, water, and bullets. But people in Montana might have thought that the end of the world was coming via zombie takeover, and it was sent out to the perfect group of people. People watching the Steve Wilkos show. You know, the folks that are hanging out watching daytime TV are the ones who would be most excited about the end of the world coming. But during an episode of the Steve Wilkos show in 2013, there was a warning that went across the screen and warned the people that the dead were coming back to life and attacking the living. Of course, this was fake. I think if there's anywhere in the world where the dead are going to come back to life, it's not going to be in Montana. Usually it would seem that these things happen because of some advanced science going awry, and I don't think there's any high-tech happenings going on over there. Next on the list, guys, we have the Wyoming hijacking. I think we have gotten to the point where you can't hijack a signal anymore unless you have some of the best tech on the market, and even if you did, you would probably get caught pretty fast. But back in the day, you could get away with it easy peasy. The Wyoming incident is one of the weirdest ever. It was a hijacking of a news broadcast after the 2008 election. Seems like a pretty good time to steal the news. There would have been so many people watching. The broadcast was just some black and white bars across the screen and a series of words that popped up. It closed out with some very strange images of heads that seemed to be digitized. The messages were creepy, claiming that people will see beautiful things and that some of the people will become sick. And the messages all used the statement "we" as if there was a group of people who were sending out these messages. The whole thing was very strange and never explained, and there were rumors that some of the people who watched the broadcast actually started to hallucinate. Next on the list, we have Verillion. Nothing like a good old-fashioned message that came from outer space. That's what we really need on this channel. Well, this was for sure a message from a person, they just claimed that it was from space. The Verillion incident lasted about 6 minutes and it took place in 1977. It was a voice that was able to commandeer the news at 5 a.m. and talk to the people watching and say that he was from space and that he was warning humanity that they needed to stop fighting, that they were too in love with war, and that if they didn't change their ways, that a force would come in and stop them. He also said that our constant fighting was causing us to miss out on the age of Aquarius, which was the next step in evolution. Next on the list, we have Kaluga. For this one, we're going to have to shoot over to Soviet Russia in the mid-60s. That must have been like Disneyland. I'm just joking. It was a very dark place and there were no jokes. But back then, there was something known as the Kaluga incident, which might have been one of the scariest things that ever happened during a TV hijacking. This happened in the city of Kaluga. Everyone was chilling, watching TV, and then out of nowhere, a message came on the screen that made everyone feel like they were about to die. The message said that the Americans had launched a rocket at the USSR, and these were in fact nuclear warheads. There was mass panic, but eventually everyone got the word that the message was a fake. The person responsible was an 18-year-old boy who was using a transmitter to hijack the signal. He was later arrested and had to make a public apology and swear that he would never broadcast anything ever again. And finally, guys, we have the Wenzhou protest. This is one of the crazier ones on this list because it wasn't just someone sending out a vague, unclear message or something creepy put on TV for an unknown reason. Back in 2014, in the town of Wenzhou, China, there was a very clear message that popped up on cable. It was a message speaking out against the communism in the Chinese government and a message telling people they should switch to a pro-democratic system. They used images of Tank Man from the Tiananmen Square to get these messages across, and the hijack was up for about 10 minutes. This was a short-lived moment. Now, as far as I know, the people who pulled off this stunt were never found. But there's one thing I know about China, and that's don't speak out against the government unless you want to go missing. So there is a chance that these people were found and just put in a hole so no one would ever find them ever again.
So in 1977, during a regular news broadcast in southern England, the audio suddenly cut out. The picture went all fuzzy, and there was this buzzing noise. Then a strange metallic voice cut in, claiming to be Verillion from the Ashtar Galactic command. And for nearly 6 minutes it delivered this bizarre message, warning humanity to stop fighting, destroy its weapons, and prepare for a great awakening. It also told viewers that they were being watched and guided by beings from other worlds. The station was completely unaware of what was going on until people started calling in. Engineers figured out someone had hijacked the signal by targeting a specific transmitter that rebroadcast signals from another tower, basically exploiting a weak point in the system. But even still, they never found out who actually did this. Whoever it was, though, needed some serious technical skill and equipment. People have analyzed every part of this message. Some say it was just a prank, others think it was someone who genuinely wanted to put this message out there. And then there are those who actually think this message was coming from somewhere up in space. I'd love to believe that, but I don't. Back in March of 2015, Coco 5 News in Oklahoma City was running a normal early morning traffic report. Nothing exciting, just the usual aerial feed from their Grand Casino Skycam out in Shawnee. But then, out of nowhere, this glowing white object zipped across the screen at lightning speed. It was super fast, too fast to be a plane, and the movement doesn't look like a drone either. The news anchors didn't even notice it live. Viewers caught it first and started flooding the station with questions. To their credit, the news station didn't ignore it. They re-aired the footage and posted it online, asking the public to help figure out what it was. Problem is, nobody really could. It wasn't a meteor, those fall, they don't fly sideways at a steady height. It wasn't a bug on the lens either, the light shifts as it moves and you could see it behind distant clouds. It wasn't a military or commercial aircraft as far as anyone could tell, and it didn't match any scheduled flights. Despite being caught live on air and analyzed frame by frame, nobody's ever nailed down exactly what this thing was. Alright, this is an interesting one, because it's not what happened on TV that was the mysterious part, but what was going on with viewers while the broadcast was happening. So in 1992, the BBC aired a Halloween special called Ghost Watch. This was a fake documentary about a haunted house in North London. The thing is, most viewers didn't realize it was scripted. The show was presented like any other live broadcast, except the crew was investigating a poltergeist called Pipes. Viewers at home would catch glimpses of the ghostly figure of Pipes in the background of shots, and there would be weird audio glitches. On top of that, of course, the subject matter was just unsettling on its own. The atmosphere felt real. Too real, and as the broadcast went on, people started calling in to report their own paranormal experiences. Others were convinced that the show had invited an actual spirit into their homes. The BBC got tens of thousands of complaints. One girl reportedly entered a catatonic state after watching it. People were legitimately freaking out, even though the show had a brief disclaimer at the start. If you happened to tune in after it, you'd have no way of knowing that this was staged. The format fooled a lot of people, including some of the presenters who weren't even told everything that would happen. Scientists and psychologists later studied the public's reaction to the show, calling it a rare case of mass suggestion triggered by media. The show only aired once and the BBC banned it for a decade. In November of 2024, a local New York TV station was doing live helicopter coverage of traffic over the Hudson River. Same old stuff, until this strange glowing orb floats into the frame, hovering, changing color, then darting out of view. It starts out white and then turns blue and kind of semi-translucent before flying off. The anchor didn't react at the moment, but when the clip was shared online, people started talking about it. Some blamed lens flares, some guessed maybe it was a drone, others said a weather balloon, but the object didn't behave like any of those. It hovered, it changed color, then accelerated. Not even the FAA had an answer. What are we looking at here? Good question. This clip was posted to Reddit by user Steve90,000, who wrote that on December 13th, 2024 at 5 p.m., ABC News caught an orb on video when in New Jersey investigating the drone situation. At the time, tons of people were spotting UAPs over the state. So what you're looking at here is just one of them. As for what it actually was, we still don't know. On April 27, 1986, HBO viewers were watching The Falcon and the Snowman when their screens suddenly cut to black, and for about 5 minutes, a message appeared in bright white text on a color test pattern that read, "Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way." The broadcast had been hijacked. The person behind it was John R. McDougall, a satellite engineer who was frustrated with HBO's pricing, which he felt was unfair to satellite dish owners who had to pay monthly fees for content that used to be free. McDougall later admitted that he'd used his own satellite equipment at a Florida transmission site to briefly override HBO's signal. He knew exactly how to aim his dish and transmit at just the right frequency to cut into their feed. Authorities launched an investigation, and within a few months, he was caught. He was fined and given probation, so yeah, the guy was identified, but I just had to bring this one up. The fact that this guy successfully interrupted one of the largest cable networks without immediate detection is pretty nuts. This is one of the most high-profile broadcast intrusions in US history. In 2021, Sam Hessler, a reporter for CBS 6, was doing a live morning segment from Greenbridge Cemetery in Saratoga County, New York. At the time, everything seemed perfectly normal. Nobody on set noticed anything unusual. It wasn't until later that day when a viewer contacted the station saying they'd seen something strange walking behind her during the broadcast. When the news team went back to review the footage, they spotted it too. Some sort of figure crossing the background. It almost looked like it appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. The clip got passed around and people slowed it down to try and figure out what it was. In the slowed version, you can clearly see a shadowy form moving across the screen. Now, Greenridge Cemetery already has a bit of a spooky reputation. There have been stories of eerie things there over the years. You can imagine the details. Nothing super out of the ordinary for a cemetery. But to have something captured on live television like this, that hits a little different. The reptilian conspiracy is one of the more out there theories floating around, but somehow it's got a pretty big following, partly thanks to supposed footage of it. The idea is that some of the world's most powerful people, your politicians, singers, actors, that they're not actually human, that they're instead these shape-shifting reptilian creatures wearing human skin suits as a disguise while secretly pulling the strings behind all the world's biggest decisions. What's kept this conspiracy alive for so long is what some claim to be video evidence. Over the years, live TV has supposedly caught these lizard people slipping up. There are clips of news anchors and politicians where their pupils briefly look like vertical slits instead of round human eyes. Sometimes their faces seem to glitch, momentarily revealing what looks like snake-like patches of skin underneath. Plenty of people have slowed these clips down, zoomed in, and picked apart the footage frame by frame, and then posted top 10 lists online talking about it. Well, I gotta talk about it. I know it, you know it, but that's because this is the wildest live broadcast hack in history, the Max Headroom incident, still unsolved. On November 22nd, 1987, on the evening news on WGN in Chicago, the screen suddenly cut to a man wearing a Max Headroom mask, a character from a TV show around that time. The man didn't say anything at first, he just stood there as this background behind him was spinning around, making strange movements, and you also hear a bit of a buzzing noise. The station quickly cut the feed, got back to the news. It only lasted about 20 seconds, but that wasn't the end of it. Just 2 hours later, during a broadcast of Doctor Who on the local PBS station, the same masked man took over again, and this time he started talking, mumbling phrases that made no sense, mocking TV personalities, even getting spanked with a fly swatter by someone off camera. It's a mix of emotions watching this footage. It's undoubtedly eerie, but you can't say there isn't humor in this too. The whole thing lasted about 90 seconds before the station finally managed to cut him off. The Federal Communications Commission launched an investigation, but they never caught the person responsible. To this day, no one knows who did it or exactly how they pulled it off. Why even? Breaking into live broadcasts like this is not easy. It would have required a lot of knowledge and skill. It's considered one of the weirdest unsolved broadcast intrusions ever. In early 2002, cable TV viewers in several Chinese cities were suddenly interrupted by unexpected programming. It was a planned hijack by members of Falun Gong, a spiritual group that had been heavily suppressed by the Chinese government. The hijackers wanted to challenge the official version of a disturbing public event from the year before. They showed videos disputing state propaganda and calling for an end to persecution. Depending on the city, the hijack lasted anywhere from a few minutes to nearly an hour, and some reports even longer. These weren't digital hacks, they physically tapped into broadcasting equipment, which took some serious planning. A few months later, 15 people were arrested, and they were given very harsh prison sentences. In the years that followed, reports came out that several of those arrested had died while in custody. But those claims have been hard to verify because of how tightly China controls information. During the 2006 Lebanon War, Israel managed to break into Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV and broadcast their own message, a very direct threat aimed at Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. His face appeared on screen with crosshairs over it, followed by the sound of 3 loud pops and footage of Israeli airstrikes. It only lasted a few seconds, but the point was quite obviously not subtle. Fast forward to 2014 during the Gaza conflict, and this time the other side hijacked Israel's Channel 10 with a warning telling people to stay in their bomb shelters, mixed with graphic images from Gaza. Then again in 2016, people watching Big Brother on Israel's Channel 2 suddenly had their feed cut and replaced with another propaganda clip. That one lasted about 3.5 minutes, just long enough to get noticed before it was pulled. None of these takeovers were super polished, but they were meant to shake people up, not just jam the airwaves, but get into viewers' heads. When we're talking about broadcast interruptions that terrified the public, well, these are pretty much the textbook definition. In 1959, a few thousand people in Michigan were trying to watch the World Series when their screen just went black for the entire first 3 games. Turned out it wasn't a tech failure. A former station employee named Harold Lindgren had snuck into a relay station miles out of town and jammed the signal by shoving steel wool into a pipe in the transmitter. He'd been fired a few weeks earlier and wanted to get back at the boss who let him go. He called the whole thing a diabolical plot. And to be fair, kind of was. He drove out at night, climbed a fence, sabotaged the equipment with stuff he'd just grabbed from his kitchen sink. Technicians from Chicago and Green Bay had been brought in to figure out what happened. When police finally tracked him down, Lindgren admitted to everything. He didn't really seem to care about hiding it, just wanted to make a point. In 1980, WSB-TV in Atlanta had a bizarre incident during a kids' cartoon block. Oh boy. The Plastic Man Comedy Adventure Show was on. Yeah, that show that we all remember. Well, right in the middle of a commercial break, the screen suddenly cut to a still photo of a woman for a couple seconds, nude. The image had been spliced into a Georgia Forestry Commission ad. It seemed like an accident, but apparently it wasn't. The station's general manager, Fred Barber, later admitted that 2 master control operators had done this on purpose. They were the guys who handled overnight sign-offs and morning startup duties. And apparently one of them liked splicing random things onto tapes, and this time no one on the station's morning staff caught it before it aired. The operators were fired immediately. Even though it was over in seconds, it caused a huge stir. Because, well, first of all, the time slot, worst time and place to show a naked woman on TV, and this was a major station. So the rules around tape handling and sign-on and sign-off procedures were tightened. On January 4th, 2000, the Teletubbies was playing on the GMA network in the Philippines. On this particular morning, for just a few seconds, the screen cut to a photo of actress Rosanna Rosas with her chest exposed. Teletubbies was weird enough as is. This was the last thing these young viewers needed to see. Obviously, this immediately triggered a warning from the country's media review board. GMA later explained that the whole thing was a mistake, caused by an employee who was fixing a computer at the time. Apparently, he pressed the wrong button while trying to help with some system repairs, and somehow that caused the wrong image to like flash on air. That sounds hard to believe. I mean, that really does sound like the excuse you give when you just don't know what to say. Oh, I pressed the wrong button, and then it was boobs. Anyway, they insisted nobody did this as a prank. The network apologized and promised to tighten up controls. The employee was never named. Wasn't much follow-up on whether he kept his job, but it's definitely freaked out parents and probably gave a few kids a weird memory of Teletubbies. They probably grew up thinking this was some bizarre fever dream. On October 8th, 2022, in the middle of a live newscast on Iran's state-run TV, the broadcast suddenly cut to a masked figure and a black screen showing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei surrounded by flames with a digital target on his head. It only lasted 12 seconds, but this was very loud and clear. The screen also showed photos of 4 women who had recently died during the Mahsa Amini protests, along with the phrase "Women, Life, Freedom" repeated over and over. Mahsa Amini was a 22-year-old woman who died after being arrested by Iran's morality police for supposedly not wearing her headscarf the right way. Her death quickly set off protests all across the country. The group behind this hack called themselves Adalat Ali, a hacktivist collective that had already leaked internal government documents in the past. State TV anchors were clearly rattled when the feed returned. I mean, just look at this news anchor's face. People inside and outside Iran shared clips of the hack almost immediately, and it spread fast online. No one really knows how deep the investigation went or if anyone got caught, but even though it was under 15 seconds, this was one of the most direct, high-profile hacks ever pulled off on live Iranian television. Now, for obvious reasons, I can't actually find footage of these Soviet pirate broadcasting hacks. I mean, it was the Soviet Union, everything was very locked down, but back in the Soviet Union, where the government completely controlled radio and TV, pirate broadcasting wasn't done as a prank. This was one of the only ways to hear anything outside what the government wanted you to hear. As early as 1966, there were reports of a teenager in Kaluga hijacking the radio to spread fake news about a nuclear war breaking out with the US. That kind of hoax was rare, but actual hijackers were popping up constantly, especially during the 70s and 80s. They'd jump onto relay stations during programming gaps and broadcast their own music, their own opinions. Sometimes the state would lash back in newspapers, calling them radio hooligans and accusing them of jamming frequencies needed by emergency aircraft. Whether that part was true or just scare tactics isn't totally clear. I imagine there was a lot of exaggeration going on. Oh, there are even hotlines for citizens to report pirate signals, but these underground broadcasters kept showing up, proving how desperate the people were for anything that wasn't just government propaganda. In 2005, ABC 13 Action News in Las Vegas covered a man named Ramon Watkins, who referred to himself as Prophet Yahweh. He claimed that he could summon UFOs just by praying, and said he would prove it live on camera. Well, ABC sent a reporter, Mike Dello Stritto, and a cameraman to meet him near Lake Mead. The prophet prayed, and within moments, something strange appeared in the sky. It was 2 bright spherical objects hovering and slowly moving in the distance. The cameraman caught them clearly on video as they floated across the sky. The footage aired live, and people who were watching could see it happen in real time. This wasn't a quick flash or something easily dismissed. It stayed visible long enough for everyone to focus on it. Prophet Yahweh said he heard a voice in his head telling him when the UFOs would appear and where to look. But was this really the case? I mean, that is obviously very hard to believe. Could the objects have been balloons, drones, aircraft? Maybe, but they didn't seem to move like any of those things. The ABC crew didn't offer an explanation, and the event still gets passed around online with no solid answer for what actually showed up in the sky that day. On August 5th, 2009, during a live morning news broadcast on BBC Northeast, anchor Colin Briggs was delivering the day's stories when something strange appeared on the screen behind him. It was this wide shot of the Millennium Bridge in Newcastle, coming from the BBC's live webcam feed. Suddenly, this white streak of light zips across the frame, not falling downward, but shooting further into the sky before disappearing. The object was fast moving, but clear enough that viewers noticed, and people started recording it from their televisions and quickly shared the clips online. Some said it was a bird, a toy plane, but it doesn't really look like either of those things to me, and it didn't to Nick Pope, who is a former UK Ministry of Defence UFO investigator. He reviewed the slowdown footage and said it didn't look like a bird and that the movement was genuinely strange. The BBC later did a follow-up asking for viewer opinions, but never provided a final answer or any definitive explanation for what happened. On February 11th, 2013, during an afternoon broadcast on KRTV in Great Falls, Montana, during an episode of the Steve Wilkos Show, the emergency alert system suddenly cut in. Thank God, everyone said. Why was I watching the Steve Wilkos Show? Suddenly, though, viewers heard this voice calmly announce that the, quote, bodies of the dead are rising from their graves and attacking the living.
Civil authorities in your area have reported that the bodies of the dead are rising from their graves and attacking the living.
The message warned people not to approach these zombies and to wait for further instructions. It sounded pretty official and used the same tones and format as real emergency alerts. Within hours, similar hoax messages interrupted TV stations in Michigan, Wisconsin, and New Mexico. Even more strange, 2 days later, a radio station in La Crosse, Wisconsin played a recording of the hoax alert and accidentally triggered the EAS again, rebroadcasting the zombie warning to viewers who thought it was happening all over again. Investigators later confirmed that hackers had exploited a weak security on the emergency broadcast equipment, in many cases using default passwords that were still active. The hackers were eventually caught, but as for how exactly they did this, that's never been disclosed, probably for obvious reasons. On January 3rd, 2007, people in Australia were watching Mayday Head-On Collision, a documentary about air travel disasters, when something very weird happened. In the middle of the broadcast on Channel 7, the original audio suddenly cut out and was replaced with a looping clip from an old news story about a Halliburton convoy ambush.
Lord, Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord.
The audio was just a truck driver named Preston Wheeler screaming, "Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord," over and over. The audio kept repeating that same line for 5 solid minutes while the visuals from the documentary kept playing. Nobody knew how this happened. One viewer said he kept calling the station while it was happening, but no one answered the phones. There was no follow-up, no investigation. Channel 7 just brushed it off and moved on. This one is very eerie, though. On October 2nd, 2014, Colette Provencher was delivering a live weather report on TVA News from the rooftop of the network's building in Montreal. As she talked, a bright green orb floated across the sky behind her. She didn't notice anything at the time, but viewers definitely did. The footage spread online, and people started arguing about what the glowing object actually was. Some said it was just a meteor. Others pointed out that the object looked way too big and wasn't moving like a typical shooting star. It also seemed to slow down mid-flight, which doesn't make sense for a meteor. The orb stayed visible for several seconds and didn't burn out like you'd expect. In 2007, viewers of a Czech TV's Sunday morning show Panorama got a pretty disturbing surprise. The program usually just airs quiet, scenic shots from mountain resorts, basically tourism ads. But on June 17th, the feed from one of the cameras suddenly showed what looked like a small nuclear explosion going off in the countryside. It only lasted a few seconds and ended in static. This was subtle enough that some viewers didn't know if it was real or not, but the explosion was actually fake. It was CGI, planted by a local art collective. They'd physically tampered with the mountaintop camera to inject their pre-recorded video into the live broadcast. It's a creepy video. Really hits that analog horror kind of vibe before the analog horror genre was fully formed. Just this shot of a calm, scenic landscape with lazy elevator music playing in the background, and then this horrific explosion going off in the distance, totally offsetting everything. It all looks pretty convincing too. The group had pulled off other stunts before, but this one hit a nerve, especially with tourism businesses in the area who said it could scare visitors away. Check TV considered legal action, but the group framed it as a kind of social experiment about media trust, forcing people to question what they were seeing on TV. In 1985, 4 Polish scientists pulled off something that looked more like a science fair project than a protest, but really rattled the government. These were astronomers, not hackers, and they used a ZX Spectrum home computer, some homemade circuits, and a transmitter to beam anti-regime messages right onto state-run TV in the city of Torun. Overlaid on the screen was text saying, "Solidarity, Torun. Boycotting the election is our duty. And solidarity, Torun. Enough price hikes, lies, and repression." All of it was signed with the logo of banned labor movement. Viewers at home were probably stunned to see the state's broadcast suddenly taken over by what looked like on-screen subtitles calling out the system. It didn't last long, but it did make a point. The 4 scientists were eventually caught and charged with owning an illegal transmitter and publishing what was labeled dangerous material. They received 4 months in jail and a fine. Put yourself in the shoes of some dude tuning into the Playboy channel in 1987. You have a mullet, you just finished cruising the highway with your top down blasting Motley Crue on the radio, and the best way to top off the day is to tune in to the channel with maybe a brew or two. That was the 80s, right? Well, on this day, you're in the middle of your spicy movie when all of a sudden the screen gets overtaken by this black background with a simple white message quoting Bible verses telling people to honor the Sabbath and repent. That kind of kills the vibe. Well, the FCC eventually zeroed in on a guy named Thomas Haney, who worked as an uplink engineer for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Even though the message didn't say where it came from, investigators noticed certain video fingerprints, subtle traces in the signal that hinted at the type of equipment used, and from that they connected it to CBN. The station denied being involved, of course. Haney swore he was innocent, and CBN said their gear couldn't have even pulled it off. They tried to recreate the hijack using the same setup and failed, but the government argued otherwise, saying that it was possible and that Haney had the access and technical know-how. Eventually, a jury convicted him on 2 counts, though he was cleared of interfering with another adult channel due to poor video evidence. He didn't serve time, but he did get probation, a fine, and community service. Gotta say, I'm no expert on things like this, but I don't think things would play out the same way today. I don't know. I don't think the dude would have gotten in nearly as much trouble today. Society's just, I don't know, a little more prudish these days. They took their Playboy very seriously back in the 80s, it seems. Imagine chilling out on a regular afternoon, maybe watching the Steve Wilkos show, when suddenly your TV flashes this strange emergency alert. Only it isn't about a tornado or an Amber Alert. Instead, it's describing the bodies of the dead rising from their graves and attacking the living. On February 11th, 2013, people across the US were watching normal daytime TV when the screen suddenly cut to an emergency alert. And it was exactly what I just described. It sounded like the same system used for real disasters, except it was about zombies. It was on screen for a while. Gotta assume some people actually started freaking out, especially all those folks with bunkers full of canned food, but then programming snapped back to normal. Turned out hackers had broken into station equipment that was badly secured and used it to send these fake alerts, but they never found out who actually did this. In September 1985, during communist rule in Poland, 4 astronomers in the city of Torun did something extraordinary. They hijacked the state TV signal and replaced normal programming with text messages supporting the Solidarity Movement, a labor union and political group fighting against government oppression. The messages criticized rising food prices, the government's lies, and the control that they had over everyone's lives. It was a direct political protest. People couldn't believe what they were looking at. The state controlled all broadcasting, and independent messages were almost impossible to show. Pulling this off required technical knowledge of the broadcasting system. The astronomers had figured out how to override the state transmitter and insert their messages live. The interruption lasted only a few minutes, but it was long enough to be noticed by thousands of viewers. Eventually, the 4 were caught, prosecuted, but the broadcast became legendary because it was one of the first live TV signal hijacks used explicitly as a political protest, unlike some other less serious hijacks on this list. On January 4th, 2000, kids in the Philippines were watching Teletubbies on GMA Network, which was one of the most popular children's shows on TV at the time. We all know the Teletubbies, as much as some of us would want to forget it. I know a number of folks who grew up with this show and thought it was just some strange fever dream they had, but right in the middle of the broadcast, the show cut out for a few seconds. Instead of the weird, multicolored aliens with pure black eyes kids were used to gawking at, the screen showed a still image of Rosanna Rosas, who was widely known in the Philippines at the time for adult roles and some adult film work. No, she was not making a guest appearance on the Teletubbies. This was obviously not supposed to air during a kid's time slot. The interruption was short, but it didn't matter. Parents noticed immediately. Kids noticed. People called the station asking what had just happened. The image vanished, Teletubbies came back on, and the show continued as if nothing had happened. Turned out that the wrong clip was loaded or triggered during live transmission somehow, and because it was live, it went straight to air. Even years later, this gets brought up as one of the strangest, most uncomfortable live TV mistakes in Philippine broadcast history. On November 10th, 2017, people in Malmo, Sweden tuned in to Mix Megapol, a major commercial radio station. Normally, it's non-stop music, DJs, ads, the usual, but that morning, listeners started hearing something completely different. The station had been pushed off its own frequency. For about 30 minutes, the normal broadcast was replaced by an unauthorized transmission playing propaganda. Anyone listening in the area heard the takeover instead of Mix Megapol's programming. Someone had used a pirate radio transmitter strong enough to overpower the station's signal in that area. As long as that transmitter stayed on, the real station couldn't reach listeners. After about half an hour, the hijacked signal finally stopped and Mix Megapol came back on the air. That was the end of it. They never caught who did it. On November 26, 1977, viewers across southern England were watching the evening news when something went wrong. Very wrong. The picture stayed normal, but the audio was suddenly taken over by a deep, calm, distorted voice that identified itself as Verillion, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic command. And for over 5 minutes, the voice delivered a strange message claiming to come from space. It warned humanity about nuclear weapons and the negative impact we lowly humans were having on the environment, urging people to abandon their weapons and live in peace. Now, obviously this was not a studio mistake. Someone had overridden the broadcast audio signal, which again meant whoever this was knew exactly what they were doing. Investigators also believed the hijacker had to be physically nearby to pull this off, but nobody was ever identified or charged. Decades later, it's still one of the craziest broadcast interruptions in history. In early 2002, cable TV viewers in cities across China suddenly had their regular programming cut off by something completely different. It was a coordinated hijack carried out by members of Falun Gong, a spiritual group that had been heavily cracked down on by the Chinese government. The goal was to push back against the official stories surrounding a highly publicized incident from the year before. The clips accused the state of lying and called to an end to the persecution of Falun Gong. How long it lasted depended on where you were. In some cities it was over in a few minutes, in others, people reported it running for close to an hour, and in a few cases, even longer. This wasn't done remotely or through computers. The people involved physically tapped into cable broadcasting lines, which meant scouting locations, accessing equipment, and taking serious risks to pull it off. A few months later, police arrested 15 people tied to the hijack, and apparently, a bunch of them just happened to die in custody. In 1980, a cartoon called the Plastic Man Comedy Adventure Show was airing in Atlanta. And right in the middle of a commercial break, the screen suddenly cut to a still photo of a nude woman for just a couple seconds. The image had been spliced into a Georgia Forestry Commission ad. Turns out, it wasn't an accident. The station's general manager, Fred Barber, later said that 2 control operators had done it on purpose. These were the people who handled overnight sign-offs and morning startups. Apparently one of them liked splicing random stuff onto tapes as a joke. This time, a morning staffer didn't catch it before it went live. Both operators were fired immediately. In 1959, a few thousand people in Michigan tuned in to watch the World Series. only to have their screens go completely black for the first 3 games. First, everyone assumed it was just a technical issue, but it wasn't. A former station employee named Harold Lindgren had snuck into a relay station about 35 miles outside town and deliberately jammed the signal. In a pretty blunt way, too. He just shoved a bunch of steel wool into a pipe in the transmitter. He'd been fired a few weeks earlier and wanted revenge on the boss who let him go. Technicians from Chicago and Green Bay were brought in to figure out what had gone wrong. When police finally tracked him down, Lindgren didn't even attempt to hide anything. In 2007, Czech TV's Sunday morning show Panorama shocked a lot of viewers. Normally, it was just calm footage of mountain resorts with soft background music. It was basically just a tourist ad, but on June 17th, one of the live cameras suddenly cut to what looked like a small nuclear explosion in the countryside. It only lasted a few seconds before the feed went static, which probably just made the whole thing more believable. The explosion was fake though, pure CGI, but it wasn't just added digitally later. A local art collective had physically tampered with the mountaintop camera to play their pre-recorded clip as if it were happening live. People freaked out, of course. Local tourism offices were pissed, worried it could scare visitors. Czech TV looked into taking action, but the collective behind it just shrugged and called it a social experiment. They wanted people to stop trusting everything they saw on TV, and for a few terrifying seconds, it worked. In 1987, the Playboy channel was briefly hijacked by a black screen displaying white text quoting Bible verses, instructing viewers to honor the Sabbath and repent. The Federal Communications Commission looked into it, and their investigation eventually led to a man named Thomas Haney, an engineer for the Christian Broadcasting Network. They found subtle traces in the signal that matched CBN's equipment. CBN denied having any involvement, and Haney said he didn't do it. Tests trying to recreate the hijack with the same equipment failed, but they still argued that Haney had the access and knowledge to carry this out. So he was convicted on 2 accounts related to the hijack, but cleared of interfering with another adult channel due to lack of evidence. He didn't serve time, but he did receive probation, a fine, and community service. In May 2006, WBAB, a rock station based on Long Island, had its signal hijacked during a regular morning broadcast. Listeners were hearing Pink Floyd's Hey You, but the song suddenly cut out. And what replaced it was probably the most racist song I've ever heard. I mean, yeah, we obviously can't play this for you here. It's full of all the worst slurs, modern and old school. The song was recorded in the 60s by Johnny Rebel, who was just an openly racist American singer. The song played for about a minute to a minute and a half before the station's normal feed returned. As for how this happened, it wasn't someone messing around with a weak pirate transmitter. The hijacker appeared to have overridden the station's studio to transmitter link, the signal stations use to send audio from the studio to the broadcast tower. To interrupt it, someone would have needed technical knowledge, the right equipment, and enough power to overpower the station's own signal. The station staff had no control while it was happening. Engineers couldn't cut it off remotely, which meant the interference was happening closer to the transmitter than the studio was. WBAB immediately called it a federal crime and contacted the FCC. And this wasn't the first time this had happened. A couple weeks earlier, the same song had briefly interrupted WBLI, WBAB's sister station. So for whatever reason, the person responsible was deliberately targeting those stations. But the FCC never made any statement about any arrests. As far as anyone knows, the person responsible got away with it. In 1977, viewers in Madison, Wisconsin, watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, experienced something completely unexpected. The broadcast was suddenly interrupted by this unknown video signal that replaced the show. There's never been a recording of the interruption released. The hijacked footage reportedly showed unrelated video that had nothing to do with NBC programming. After a short time, normal programming resumed, as if nothing had happened. What made this case strange is how little information ever came about afterward. The station acknowledged that there had been this unauthorized signal intrusion, but they never released any details aside from that. At the time, though, overriding a broadcast signal required what's called a line of sight access to transmission paths or relay equipment, meaning whoever did this must have known exactly how the station's setup worked. So it was either an insider or someone who just had a lot of technical knowledge of broadcast engineering. There's a case about interruptions on stations in Detroit during the mid-80s, but the internet's frustratingly thin when it comes to exactly what viewers saw. What is known is that people in Detroit at the time reported their TV picture suddenly becoming distorted, the clear broadcast breaking up, flickering, and then showing imagery that didn't come from the station's own programming. This lasted for a while before finally returning to normal. Apparently, it had nothing to do with the weather or technical trouble or some internal station error. The interruption was something forced into the feed, but why? There was no clear message, there was no slogan or overlaid graphic or audio saying anything. It was just random visuals replacing the normal show for a moment. That's what separates it from a lot of the other hijacks on this list, where someone tries to make some kind of a point or just prank everyone. That's more on that later. Instead, this felt like someone poking at the system rather than trying to broadcast a message. An investigation was opened at the time, but nothing ever came of it. But this was WJBK, a major station. So the idea that someone could physically interrupt the signal without leaving a trace was kind of a big deal. In the early 80s, people watching HBO in various parts of the US started noticing something strange as well. During regular programming, the picture would sometimes drop out of the scheduled lineup and briefly show totally unrelated video or static, often with distorted sound. These interruptions bounced in and out without warning. Because HBO and other networks were being delivered by satellite back then, some people suspected the disruptions weren't just local cable issues, but something hitting the network before it even reached cable systems. The way the feeds worked at the time meant that someone with access to satellite uplinks or relay paths could theoretically inject a signal upstream, whatever the hell all that means. But it would cause the viewer to see something unexpected. As for what the hacker or hackers were trying to do though, who knows? There didn't seem to be any purpose behind them. They didn't repeat at the same times, they didn't target specific shows or networks. It didn't come with any text or voice explaining why they appeared. On April 27, 1986, HBO viewers were watching The Falcon and the Snowman when suddenly, right in the middle of the movie, the satellite signal was hijacked and a message appeared on screen. It was protesting HBO's subscription fees for home satellite dish owners. It was a pretty friendly message to anyone not working at HBO anyway, saying, "Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight, $12.95 a month? No way. Showtime/movie channel, beware." The interruption lasted about 4.5 minutes. Technicians at HBO tried to regain control of the feed, but the signal was strong enough that they couldn't override it. The broadcast was now out of their control. Eventually, the FBI and FCC tracked the intrusion back to a man named John R. McDougal, an electrical engineer who went by the name Captain Midnight, using equipment from his uplink station in Central Florida. He surrendered and was fined $5,000, sentenced to a year probation, and had his amateur radio license suspended for a year. This next one goes all the way back to October 27, 1968. A bizarre broadcast incident in Palm Springs, California made local headlines when the off-air signal of then new ABC affiliate KPLM TV was accidentally hijacked with some adult material. Shortly after the station had signed off and switched to its test pattern, viewers suddenly saw the racy film playing instead of the usual blank screen and bars. And it ran for a while too, about 15 minutes before the error was discovered and corrected. Turned out a 25-year-old technician named Alan Veach, who was alone in the studio that morning, had brought the videotape into the building. While he was watching it privately, somehow the playback ended up feeding into the line going to the cable company distribution center, which was live, sending the signal straight into people's homes. Police arrested Veach after the incident. He later pled guilty in federal court to violating laws against transmitting obscene material, and he was fined $500. I think the embarrassment was enough punishment alone, though. On February 1st, 2009, viewers in parts of Arizona tuning into the Super Bowl got a very unexpected surprise. During the fourth quarter of the game between the Arizona Cardinals and the Pittsburgh Steelers, the feed from NBC affiliate KVOA suddenly cut out, and for about 28 seconds, people saw explicit footage from the adult video Wild Cherries 5 instead of the game. Viewers across Tucson were stunned and horrified, watching what should have been the biggest football game of the year replaced with something, less family-friendly. At first, Comcast, which delivered the signal to local cable systems, said this looked like a deliberate hijack, promised a full investigation. KVOA launched its own investigation as well. For a while, nobody knew who was responsible though. It wasn't until February 4th, 2011, more than 2 years later, that police arrested 38-year-old Frank Tenori Gonzalez, a former Cox Cable employee from Arizona. Gonzalez eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of computer tampering. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation and had to pay a $1,000 fine to the Arizona Attorney General's anti-racketeering fund. In April 2002, Venezuela was in chaos. Protests were happening all over the country, with clashes between supporters of President Hugo Chavez and the opposition. TV became a big part of the fight, with both sides trying to control what people saw. On April 12th, opposition-aligned military forces took over the state-owned channel VTV. The station went off the air, and anyone watching only saw cartoons or old movies instead of news. So the pro-Chavez side was completely cut off. At the same time, private channels were pushing the opposition. They showed anti-Chavez marches and urged the people to join the demonstrations. Pro-Chavez rallies barely got any coverage, creating a blackout for his supporters. Disruption lasted less than 2 days. Chavez supporters took back VTV and the presidential palace, regular broadcasts returned, and the president was back in power. In September 2012, a North Carolina family was watching Lilo and Stitch on their TV when something completely unexpected happened. About a minute into the movie, the picture pixelated, and for around 6 minutes the movie disappeared, replaced with much more adult footage before normal programming returned. The mom, Georgie Brown, says she first heard sounds coming from the living room that clearly did not belong in a family cartoon. And when she ran in, they were terrified, one screaming and covering his ears, another in tears. Brown had recorded the movie a few days earlier and played it back for her 3 children. They hadn't touched the remote or changed the channel. Instead, the 6 minutes of adult material appeared right in the middle of her recorded movie, between messages saying part of the program was lost due to signal issues. A Dish Network contractor who looked at Brown's receiver said he'd never seen anything like it in his 15 years in the TV business. And Dish said they were taking the incident seriously and investigating what went wrong. On October 8th, 2022, something shocking happened during a live news broadcast on Iran's state-run television. In the middle of the program, the feed suddenly cut away to a masked figure, then to a black screen showing a politician surrounded by flames, with a digital target placed directly over his head. This lasted for about 12 seconds. The screen also displayed photos of 4 women who'd recently died during protests. Alongside the image was the phrase "Woman, Life, Freedom," repeated multiple times. The group responsible for the interruption identified themselves as Adalat Ali, a hacktivist collective already known for leaking internal Iranian government documents before this incident. Clips of the hijacking spread almost instantly, both inside and outside Iran. This next story is a first-hand account from a now-deleted Reddit user who wrote, "This has bugged me for years, and I'm honestly starting to wonder if I somehow imagined it. I grew up in southern Ohio, near the Cincinnati area, and this would have been sometime around 2003 or 2004. I was maybe 12 or 13. It was a school night, probably around 9 or 10 p.m., and I was watching TV alone in my room. I don't remember the exact channel. It might have been a local station or basic cable. I know it wasn't a premium channel. I wasn't really paying attention much to what was on. I usually use the TV to fall asleep, but I noticed when this happened. Out of nowhere, the show cut to a black screen, then this grainy video fades in. It looked like security camera footage or maybe a camcorder pointed at a TV. There was a man sitting in a chair, facing away from the camera. You couldn't see his face. He just sat there while this low humming noise played. After maybe 20 or 30 seconds, he slowly turned his head toward the camera, but the video cut out before you could really see him. Then the screen went blue for a second and the normal show came back on, like usual. The next morning, I kind of wondered if I'd just been half asleep and dreamt the thing, but when I mentioned it to a couple friends the next day at school, 2 other kids say that they saw the same thing. One lived a few streets over, another was in a different part of town. We asked our parents, but they either didn't believe us or hadn't seen it. I've searched for this on and off for years. Reddit, forums, old TV hijack lists. I've never found anything even close. If anyone else remembers something like this in Ohio around the early 2000s, please tell me I'm not losing it.
Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord.
On January 3rd, 2007, viewers in Australia were watching a Canadian show called Mayday. Partway through the episode, a clear male voice with an American accent cut in, saying what you just heard. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. The line kept repeating over and over while the show continued, looping for about 6 minutes before it finally stopped. The channel came out later saying nothing illegal had happened. A network spokesperson claimed the audio was part of the original program. People were still super confused, of course. This just seemed like a very weak excuse. So some independent researchers looked into it and they figured it out. Turned out the voice came from a recorded news broadcast during the Iraq War, filmed on September 20th, 2005, showing a civilian truck being ambushed. How that audio ended up on an episode of a totally unrelated show 2 years later, though, that's never been explained. On March 11th, 2016, people in Israel watching Big Brother on Channel 2 got a jarring surprise. For about 3.5 minutes, the broadcast was taken over by Hamas. Viewers with private satellite dishes saw images from past attacks, funeral footage, and messages in Hebrew and Arabic saying things like, "Learn from history and the story is not over." Not everyone was affected. Homes using regular cable or major satellite providers didn't see it. Almost at the same time, though, rockets were fired from Gaza into southern Israel, though luckily no one was hurt. The timing seemed to suggest, though, that the TV takeover and the attacks were connected. Israeli authorities quickly traced this back to Hamas, and the incident made headlines around the country. On April 20th, 2012, viewers in and around Hamilton, Ontario, watching News Now AM, were met with 3 minutes of, you guessed it, an adult film. This really seems to happen a lot, doesn't it? The station's news director said the issue happened because of a mix-up at one of the cable companies. Cable lines had been cut the night before, and while crews were repairing them that morning, the wrong programming was somehow spliced into the cable feed that carried the channel's signal to subscribers. In early March 2022, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine entered its second week, the collective of hackers known as Anonymous claimed that they breached a bunch of Russian state-run TV channels and streaming services and interrupted their broadcasts, with footage showing the impacts of the war. Russia 24, Channel 1, Moscow 24, and streaming platforms like Wink and IV were affected. Instead of the official state news feed, viewers saw clips of the conflict in Ukraine, along with messages in support of ending the war. In some of the footage, ending text claimed that ordinary Russians were against the war and urged opposition to the invasion. Anonymous had publicly declared it was in a kind of digital offensive against the Russian government after the invasion started. On the evening of April 8th, 2015, something big went down at French broadcaster TV5 Monde. The main TV signal, all 12 of its channels, went black while the network was celebrating the launch of a new channel. Screens went totally dark, and the station's websites and social accounts were taken over as well. Yves Bigot, the director general, later said it was the worst thing that can happen to you in television. At first, posts and messages claiming responsibility came from a group calling itself Cyber Caliphate. The broadcaster's Facebook page was defaced, and the hackers posted threats like, "The Cyber Caliphate continues its cyber jihad against the enemies of Islamic State." Inside the network, things were a mess. Signals stayed down for hours, staff couldn't use email, and TV5 had to broadcast only pre-recorded programs. One of the technicians on site finally isolated the infected machine by unplugging it, and the channel started coming back on early the next morning. The hackers had broken into TV5 Monde systems months earlier, learned how their broadcast setups worked, and then created custom software to cripple their network. And it turned out that it was a well-known Russian hacking group known as APT-28, rather than the original claim of Islamic State hackers. But why TV5 was targeted is still unclear, but the attack took TV5 offline for over 18 hours and cost millions in repairs and security upgrades. On the evening of July 29, 2025, something weird happened during a live broadcast from Brazilian channel Record News on YouTube. The live feed abruptly stopped showing the news and was replaced with a low-resolution video full of distorted visuals and odd noises, along with cryptic messages and phrases like, "You will see such pretty things. Why do you hate? And you are ill." It looked like some sort of mind control message you'd see in a movie. The interruption lasted about 3 minutes. Record News confirmed the issue only affected the YouTube stream. The regular TV broadcast and pay TV signals were not impacted here, but those phrases were the same lines found in a well-known internet creepypasta called the Wyoming Incident, a creepy fictional broadcast intrusion that's been circulating online since at least 2006.